So, your 20s are the only decade where small financial decisions can quietly decide the rest of your life. Not because you're making massive mistakes, but because everything you do in your 20s compounds for the rest of your life. And this is also the decade where you're hit with the most temptation. I'm sure you're probably scrolling Instagram and watching the people you used to go to school with flex their flashy new lifestyles and crazy vacations with constant upgrades. And even in your own social circle, your friends are probably buying new laptops and designer clothes, and maybe one of your friends even just pulled up in a brand new BMW. And without even realizing it, you start spending more money just to keep up that pace. What most people don't understand is that these small purchases don't stay small. They follow you into your 30s, they limit your 40s, and they decide whether working in your 50s and 60s is optional or something that's mandatory. So, in this video, I want to break down what I believe are the 5 worst purchases that you could make in your 20s, not to scare you out of enjoying them, but to help you avoid the traps that can quietly ruin financial freedom. So, coming in at number 5 is TikTok Shop and Instagram Shop impulse buys. And before anyone jumps in, no, I'm not telling you to be extremely frugal and to never spend a dime, because that's not realistic and not how I live. And there are certainly things you'll want or legitimately need, like new clothes, supplements, or gear for working out, and that's completely fine. But if you're going to buy things, I think you should save up and buy higher quality items that actually last and that you'll enjoy using. Because TikTok Shop and Instagram Shop are the exact opposite of that. Now, if you're on either app, you probably know what I mean, because it seems like every other scroll, there's some AI generated influencer that's shoving a product in your face and always giving the same pitch that, this is 70% off or 90% off with only 3 hours left. And that already makes you wonder how everything is somehow always on sale. But here's what's really happening: the algorithm is dialed into what you're interested in. So for me personally, I lift, and I know a lot of you guys probably lift too. And if you start watching lifting content, suddenly you're going to get bombarded with ads for creatine and pre-workout, things like gym shorts, tank tops, and even random gadgets that are promising to give you better results. And it feels personal because it is. The algorithm knows what you watch and what you linger on, and it even knows your insecurities. So when you're sitting there late at night, maybe feeling down because you're just not as big as you want to be, you might suddenly just get an ad for a supplement or a piece of clothing that's supposed to fix that. And when this happens, it's not a coincidence. It's just the sales psychology behind the algorithm. They find your pain point and trigger that insecurity so that they can then sell you the cure. So if you fall into that trap, you may start spending $10 here and $15 there because maybe you're bored and it doesn't feel like much and everything is so cheap. But that's the trick, and it does add up fast. And when your order usually shows up at your door, it's typically just low quality garbage, and the supplements have strange, unrecognizable ingredients, and the clothes are just made of straight plastic. And usually all of it just ends up in the trash. Now, personally, I've just deleted these apps to try and drop my screen time because I used to fall into this trap of impulse buying and getting all this stuff on TikTok, and I just realized none of it was really benefiting me. So, if you ever find yourself feeling like you maybe spend too much money online, I think a good rule is to wait 24 hours and see if it's still something you want to buy, because 9 times out of 10, the urge to buy something usually will disappear and you'll be glad you didn't waste your money. Now, number 4 is going to be Keeping Up with the Joneses, but the version for people in their 20s. Have you ever noticed how when you scroll through Instagram, it just feels like everyone your age is living their absolute best life? When most people hear the term keeping up with the Joneses, they picture a couple in their 30s or 40s with a massive house in a gated neighborhood, where the husband drives a lifted Ford Raptor and the wife has a Chevy Suburban. And on Instagram, it looks like they're just crushing it in life, even though in reality, they're probably broke and buried in credit card debt. And that doesn't disappear in your 20s, it just looks a little bit different. Instead of flexing houses and pickup trucks, people in their 20s typically flex experiences and their lifestyle. They're going downtown every weekend to the different nice bars and fancy restaurants with rooftop lounges. And in the wintertime, they're at overpriced ski resorts. And during the summer, they're at different concerts, festivals, and every trendy event that just looks good on Instagram. And look, I'm not trying to say you shouldn't be enjoying life in your 20s, and honestly, it's the complete opposite because this is the time to try new things and spend time with your friends and travel, and just most importantly, experiment. And most people don't have kids yet, so the responsibilities are a little bit lighter, and I think you should take advantage of that. But here's the question that separates smart spending from stupid spending. Are you doing it because you actually want to, or because you'd feel uncomfortable not doing it? Because everyone else is posting it, and because you don't want to feel left out, and you don't want to feel like you're not living your best life. Because the problem is, a lot of these experiences just leave you feeling a little bit empty afterwards. I mean, sure, once in a while you might have an amazing night downtown, but more often than not, you might just come home too late and down a couple $100 and wondering what it all was even for. And I think skiing is a great example of what I'm trying to get at here because some people genuinely love skiing and it's something they're very passionate about. And for those people, I think spending money on it really makes a lot of sense. But there's also a lot of people that only go skiing because they see TikToks of people going on these big ski trips and taking shots on the lift. And suddenly they're dropping a couple grand on gear and lift tickets just to keep up with that appearance. And that's what this version of keeping up with the Joneses really is. It's spending money to maintain the image of a lifestyle instead of living the life that you actually want to live. If you have a real passion, you should spend money on it, and that's something I do as well, which super frugal people might say that I'm delaying retirement, and that's fine with me if I'm out enjoying my life. But if you're just blowing money just to look like you're free, you're really sacrificing your financial freedom just to look like you have it. So, number three is going to be taking on a mortgage that you technically can afford, but realistically shouldn't. And this one's a little bit tricky because for some people in their 20s, buying a house can actually be a great move, but that's only if the numbers really work for you. If you plan to stay somewhere long term and find a mortgage that's comparable to what rent would be, and you have a stable income, then I think building equity definitely beats paying rent. But this is where most people mess this up. They run the numbers and they see that technically they qualify, so they take the plunge. And then they lock themselves into a 30-year mortgage just because the payment works on paper, even though it barely works with their actual lifestyle. And this is exactly how people become house poor. They can afford the mortgage technically, but not anything else. You can't afford to travel or have any hobbies, and just in general, you have no flexibility or breathing room. And let's be honest, what's the point of owning a nice home if you're just eating rice and beans every night and always stressing about your money? Now, using my own situation as an example, if I were to go and get a mortgage for a decent home where I live, it would probably cost me an extra $1,000 a month on top of what I already pay for rent and eat up more than half of my take home pay. And that would just stress me out and it would kill a lot of the freedom that I have right now because of my cheaper rent. And personally, I'd rather live in a modest apartment and actually be able to enjoy my life. You know, eating out at restaurants and having a few hobbies and even going on a vacation every year, instead of just being trapped in a house that owns me. So, for most people in their 20s, I think the smarter play is simple. You should rent something reasonable and invest the difference, and then build your skills and income on the side. Then later, when you're making more money or have dual income, then you can seriously look at buying a home. Because jumping into a mortgage early isn't really a flex, and often it's just a financial straitjacket. So, number two is going to be controversial, but I think that bougie vacations you can't really afford are a huge trap. Now, I want to start this one with a confession because this is a trap that I recently fell into. You know, most expensive trips aren't really about the experience, they're more about proving to other people you're not behind in life. And this past summer, I had a pretty simple trip I had planned in the US, which was nothing crazy, but I kept seeing all these videos of people in the Mediterranean just soaking up the sunshine with the yachts and the blue water. And I said, screw it, and abandoned my original plan and got a new trip booked to Europe. And I had a great time, but I walked away realizing something uncomfortable. The trip wasn't as magical as Instagram had made it seem. Now, don't get me wrong, I did have a good time, but it wasn't this life changing and cinematic moment that I'd built up in my head. And when I compared it to some of my more simple trips that I've taken, just road trips and backpacking trips and just some cheap weekend getaways, those honestly have been some of the best experiences of my life, and they cost a fraction of the price. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti travel, and in my own life, I've traveled quite a bit and plan to continue doing so. But I think what people forget is what vacations are actually for. And that's for slowing down, relaxing, and enjoying time with people that you care about. But instead, we've turned them into these checklists where you have to go see X, Y, and Z and take pictures of all of these things and then post them on Instagram. And half the time, the real reason people take these trips is just so that they can say at Thanksgiving, oh, yeah, we went to Europe this year. So if you genuinely want to travel somewhere, I think you should go for it, but just avoid dropping thousands of dollars just because the internet has convinced you that, going to Europe or going to Asia or going to any of these places is the only way that you can live a meaningful life. Because some of the best memories you'll ever make won't come from these bougie vacations, they'll come from some of the simplest trips where you're just with the right people. All right, so for number one, I think this is probably the biggest financial trap you might fall into if you're in your 20s, and that's getting a car that's way outside of your means. Because when you're a teenager, almost everyone starts with some beater vehicle. Either it's going to be a Toyota Corolla or a Civic, maybe a Ford Fiesta or an old Honda Accord, but no matter what it is, it's usually not something very fancy that can go very fast. But as soon as you start making real money, there's always this expectation that you're supposed to immediately upgrade. And a car payment has become the most expensive way to tell strangers that you're successful. Now, I've seen people when I was in college planning the car that they'd buy after graduation. I've seen people walking across the stage and then a few weeks later signing a $100,000 loan for a new truck. And even people that are drowning in student debt just talking casually about how they're going to go finance a new car. And eventually, yes, you will need to upgrade because eventually your car is going to become unreliable and maybe you'll have a family, and that's fine. But I think there's a massive difference between a $15,000 reliable used car and a $60,000 status symbol. Now, for me personally, I still drive the Toyota Corolla that I had when I was in college. And it's not flashy, and I don't really get any compliments for it. But for me, it's reliable and it's cheap to fix and cheap to insure. And it just gives me extra freedom because I don't have a $500 or $700 a month car payment. And if I invest, say, $400 that I might be spending on a car payment and get a 7% return, that's over $240,000 by the time I'm 50. And that's the real cost of the car. It's not really just about what you pay for it now, but the opportunity costs that you're exchanging for having that car. And you see people talk about this all the time. They regret buying that BMW at 21, and all these fancy cars just drain their wallets. And cars look like assets, but they behave like liabilities. There's nothing shameful about driving a Honda Accord or a Toyota Corolla, and it might be the smartest financial decision that you make while you're in your 20s. So, look, as always, I'm not here to tell you that you need to live your life like a monk. I think your 20s need to be fun, and you should try new things, take risks, and do what you can to build memories. But once you see these traps, the algorithm manipulating you, the social pressure pushing you to spend, you can't unsee them, and staying blind then becomes a choice. The goal isn't to retire early with money and no life. The goal is to enjoy your 20s without sabotaging your future. And that's completely possible once you know what to avoid. So make the smart choices now and you'll thank yourself later.